Hello, everyone, and welcome. Kathleen Clemons is an award-winning New England-based professional photographer who has a passion for both photography and teaching. She's best known for her beautiful creative use of natural light and artistic photographs. Her images of flowers are just incredible, and you'll be able to get a chance to see her work today and how she uses Viveza and some of her favorite filters in Efex Pro. We hope that you enjoy the presentation, and thank you, Kathleen, for being our special guest today.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks for having me. I'm going to show you how I use Viveza and color effects with my flower photos. But before I do that, I wanted to just give you a quick run through some flower photography general tips, just to make your images stronger. I mean, the more you can do in camera, the better. So let's have a look. So the first thing that I want you to know is that it's not about the gear, okay? I don't want you to get hung up thinking you have to have the perfect lens for flower photography, that, you know, you need to use exactly what I do. You really, really need to experiment with what you have. There is not just one lens that's perfect for flower photography. I shot this with my Canon 24 to 70 millimeter lens. It's not one that I use often for flowers, but I can get close and it captures beautiful, beautiful detail. So I can use that. I often will use my Canon 180 millimeter lens. I love the working distance with that lens. I love the compression that it brings to my scene, and by that I mean it brings the background forward, creates beautiful background blur. The Lensbaby Velvet 85 is indeed one of my favorites. The image you're looking at now is straight out of my camera. I've done no adjustments at all, so you don't have to have a Lensbaby, but if you were going to pick one, this is my very favorite. My other favorite Lensbaby to use for flowers is the Composer Pro with a Sweet 50 optic with a +4 macro filter, because you can't get close with that optic. Minimum focus distance is about 17 inches away. So if I add a macro filter, I can get in close. Also something to think about, if you have a lens that doesn't let you get close, think about adding something for macro. Canon 70 to 200 I don't think of as a flower photography lens, but I have used it. I shot this in Dublin, and there was a large wrought iron gate, and I needed something with a long focal length. Recently, I've been shooting with a Helios 44 to 58 millimeter lens, which is a $60 lens. You don't have to have an expensive lens for flower photography. I shoot flowers with my iPhone, and I encourage my students to use their iPhone to shoot as well. It really helps you work on composition. You can't do a whole lot with aperture, but you can still work on your lighting and work on your compositions. So if that's all you have, shoot flowers with your phone. I have a whole Instagram page dedicated to just my iPhone flowers. The second tip for you is to learn your equipment. You need to know what the minimum focus distance is of each of your lenses. If you don't, if you are closer than the lens can focus, you're going to have blurry photos. So you need to figure out how close you can get with the lenses that you have. Will the lens that you have allow you to blur the background? I find that very important in flower photography. Can you get the shallow or the deep depth of field that you want for a subject? Also need to know. Here's the deep depth of field. Okay. The third tip is to pay attention to light. That is the biggest tip that I can give you. And it's the first thing that I look at with a flower is the light. You need to train your eye to see the difference between soft shadows, like we have here on the right, and dark shadow lines and shapes that you see on the left. Flowers are all about color, shape, line, and texture, and really harsh light will affect every one of those. So train your eye. Shadows aren't bad. Shadows add depth, but you don't want a hard-edged shadow line. Okay? The fourth tip is that clouds are your friend. A cloudy day is the best light for flower photography. Add a little drizzle or a little fog, and I'm in heaven. But you don't always have cloudy days. So I bring my own cloud. I have a 12-inch diffuser and a Wimberley clamp that I attach to my tripod, and I can shoot in soft light all day long. Doesn't matter how bright it is. Make my own cloud. The fifth tip is that you need to get to know your subject from all sides. Really look at your subject. Look from straight on, from the side view. Is the side view a better choice to show the structure of the flower? Does it look better from the back side? Some flowers look great from the back, like a cosmos. Check the side view. The back view. It's a gladiola. I found it much more attractive than the front. The sixth tip is to simplify, simplify, simplify. And I'm saying that 3 times because it's that important. The simpler your compositions are, the stronger your photos will be. Okay? Just have what you feel you need in focus. Really look at your backgrounds. Look for any distracting elements. Be sure that what you found most interesting is emphasized. Okay, just simplify. Here's a little peony that I found, and I found that it was still pretty busy. The flower itself is beautiful, but look how busy the bottom half of this is. But if I shoot it in closer as a horizontal, I get the simplicity that I'm looking for. That's what you need to do. Tip number 8 is to choose the aperture that tells the story of what you see. You need, people will say to me, how much do I need in focus? You need enough in focus to tell the story of what you see. Okay? If you only see a petal edge, you want to put a strong emphasis on that, then you're going to shoot with a more shallow aperture. I shot this at f4, I believe, with 180 millimeter. If you want to emphasize all of these lines, you'd have to use a smaller aperture. You want to have no doubt what it is you wanted to show the viewer, what you found special about your subject. They should know immediately. Tip number 9 is that your background is as important as your subject. I love to find masses of color and find something to line up in front of those, which is what I did here. The background is a mass planting of Rudbeckia or Black-Eyed Susans next to my dahlia garden. So I'll do that often, but really, really look at your background. Look for distractions. Look for photo bombers sneaking into the edge of the frame. You really want a simple background to really show off your subject. Okay? And the last tip is work it. Work your subjects. Shoot horizontals, shoot verticals, shoot from the front, shoot from the side, try different lenses. Really, really work your subject. You wouldn't go to the Grand Canyon and get out of the car and take one shot. I want you to do that with flowers. Work your subjects. Okay, here's a beautiful sunflower. You wouldn't take just this one shot. Move in closer. Move in closer still. Really, really work your subjects. You don't want to get home and say, why didn't I shoot a vertical of that? Or why didn't I try moving in closer? Okay, you can see more of my work on my website, KathleenClemons.com. But now let's talk about post-processing. So I'm going to get Photoshop open, and I'm going to start by showing you Viveza. Okay, there's a cosmos that I shot in my yard, and I like the shot. Let me get my pointer, sorry, but I didn't have my reflector with me, and I was a little too lazy to go in the house, and this area is a little darker than I would like to see. Normally I would take a reflector at the time, bounce a little light under there, but I also know that I have Viveza and I could fix this in just seconds. So there are 2 ways to get to Viveza. You can go from the filter menu, or you can come over here to this list and click on Viveza. All right, you see my subject here. All right, so with Viveza, not going to get too much into all the aspects of it because Nick has some wonderful webinars. I'm just going to show you basically how I use it. These adjustments here are global adjustments where you would adjust the whole subject. I rarely use those. I'm more adjusting selectively. If I wanted to brighten up the whole thing, I could do that. I could warm it up, and that comes in handy. But most of the time, I'm making selective edits. See this area in shadow here? I'd like to see that a little bit brighter. So I'm going to come over here and click on Add Control Point. Okay. And then I'm going to place that control point right here, and I don't need it that big, so with this little slider I can pull it down to the size that I need. Okay, so that control point means that whatever adjustments that I choose from here will only affect pixels that closely match the color, the hue, the brightness, the saturation of the pixels under that point. And if I want to see what will be affected, I can come over here to the control point list, click this little box, and anything really bright will be affected. Gray will be affected slightly. Okay? So let's go back and let's just brighten that spot up. Right, and you don't go crazy. I really move the sliders very slowly. The good thing about Nik also is that it's going to put any changes you make on a new layer, and you can always, if you get back into Photoshop and you think it's too much, you can reduce the opacity as well, okay? So let's look at the before and after with that. See how dark that was and how quickly I could selectively lighten that up. So while I'm in here, I think this area here is a little darker than I would like, so I can add another control point. You can group your control points. It's nothing that I do very often because I'm just fussy enough to want to do them individually. But let's brighten this area up as well. Very slowly. That's too much. All right, and I think it's a little dark in this lower corner. Let's put a control point there. All right, so here is your before and after. Things are much more even, okay? I could, if I wanted to, click brush and apply the effect with a brush if I didn't want any of this area affected and I wanted to be certain, but it wasn't an issue in this case. Most of the time with Viveza, the control point does just what I want it to do and I don't have to use the brush, but it is an option. So let's cancel that and show you something that needs a little more editing than that. Well, let's do actually one more with a simple edit, and then I want to show you something more complex. So in the beginning, maybe just making simple edits. So let's grab Viveza. And once again, I need a larger screen. Okay. So again, this needs more light. I'm going to click Add Control Point, place that right there. I don't need it quite that large. If I want to see what will be affected, I can come over and have a look. It's great. It's just going to be the center. I'm going to brighten this up a little bit, very slowly. And I'm going to add a little structure. Structure, when I see structure, I think texture, when I want to enhance texture. So let's just add a little bit there, okay? While I'm in there, I'd like to see a little more color here, not have that quite so bright. So I'm going to put a control point here as well. And I'm going to reduce the brightness a little. And I'm going to add a little bit of blue. I love that you can add color to areas. Just gave that a little more saturation. So let's look at my before and after, okay? Let's do a more complicated edit. Those of you who have done in-person workshops with me have seen this flower a lot because it is just a prime example of, for me, of the power of Viveza. So I shot this at my friend Megan's farm and I was so enthralled with this curve that I did not pay attention to my background. Can you see that I have a light background, almost gray over here, and a beautiful green over there? I probably could have chosen a different point of view or dealt with this at the time if I wasn't so crazy about this curl, but it happens, okay? And I know that I can go into Viveza and I can either choose to make this side match this side or vice versa. I love the green, not crazy about this color, so I'm going to make the lighter color match. So let's grab Viveza. So I'm going to click Add Control Point. I'm going to make that large enough to take all of that gray, okay? So let's go over and see what's going to be affected here. All right, so all of this will be affected, but if you look, this is also affected, and I did not want that to happen, but I can deal with that. I'm going to click Add Control Point again. I'm going to put a control point here. And that basically says to Viveza, don't touch this, Okay, so let's go back and look at that first, whoops, sorry, there's the second one, the first control point again. You see now that this is not bright. It's going to be just fine. All right, so let's go back. All right, back to this control point. All right, so let's first decrease the brightness. Let's pull that down. You can see that it's still quite blue, but it's getting tone-wise closer. And let's warm it up. And let's add some green. All right, I think that's a little too bright. All right, so how long did that take me? Let's look at the before and after. I showed this with a group of students last week, and one of the students said that I should be certified as a magician. It's not me, it's the Nik software. Okay, so and looking at this, I think this area is a little bright. So let's go to this control point and let's pull the brightness down on this just a little bit. And let's add a little more green. All right, so if I was going to try and do this with the clone tool, it would just be a nightmare, you know, trying to get that around the edges. I just love how effortless it is for me to do this instead in Nik. It takes seconds and really, really simple. Let's just do one more. Let's cancel that. And I want to show you one more that has sort of a difficult background. So this is with the Helios 44-2. You get incredible bokeh. But I've got this really bright spot here that, you know, I could try and clone, but I'd like to see what I could do instead with Viveza. So let's open that back up. All right, so going to put a control point on this almost a neon area. Not sure what was back there. Okay, so let's reduce the brightness first. And let's reduce the saturation. And really, you know, when you're new to this, you're just experimenting and playing with the sliders and just watching what happens. That's getting better. Take it down even more. Let's try that. And let's reduce the warmth a bit. And let's add some red, because if you look, there are some pink tones. I think adding a little red. I think like that. And let's go and add some green now. All right, not too much. All right, so let's look at the before. See that screaming neon? And afterwards. Very, very simple edit. I want to show you a couple of more before and afters. Okay, my layers. So here is the without Viveza. You can see that I had a light area here. I've got a really, really area here that it's a cool green rather than a warm green. And can you imagine if I had to try and clone around these tiny, tiny little lines? Also had a bit of a brighter area here, and this area here needed to be brightened up. So, but with Viveza, look at the difference. Okay, you see how this area now blends in with the colors around it? Right, and there's one more I want to show you. It's a recent dahlia from my garden. And this petal right here was a different color. It has a cool pinks and it's bright. And you know, if I leave that like that, this is where your eye is going to go, because it's an area of contrast. And think about it, your eye is always drawn to contrast, to a brighter area when everything else is dark, or a dark spot when everything else is light, or something in focus when everything else is blurred. So I didn't want that contrast. But with the single control point in Viveza, now it blends in, and now I keep your eye on the curves and the areas where I wanted it to go. All right? Questions on Viveza before I move on to color effects?
Yes, there's quite a few people wanting to know how you see the mask. If you could just show them where to click to show a control point mask.
Yeah, sure. Let's open Viveza. So let's add a control point. You're not going to be able to see it if I don't add one. Okay, see this control point list box in your control panel right here. And the control point 1 is the first one I added. If you add more, they'll be below. And there's a little box right here to the right. If you click on that, you get to see what would be affected with any of these adjustments that you make. Okay?
Oh, yes, there is another one here.
Okay.
Are you working in RAW or JPEGs?
For this presentation, JPEGs only because they load quicker. But I would start with a raw file and open it in Bridge and do my basic adjustments there, and then I would take it into Nik. And if I save as a TIFF, I can my Nik layer will still be there, and I can go in and lessen the opacity if I want to afterwards. So I don't save as JPEG unless I'm uploading to the web.
Okay, great. And I did want to mention too, you're using Photoshop as your host application.
Yes.
But you can use Lightroom. People wanted to know if you ever use Lightroom.
Yeah, I don't.
Okay.
I like to be able to use the brush.
Yes, and that's in Photoshop. That's correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Especially with color effects, I use the brush a lot, most of the time, not so much in Viveza.
Okay, great. And then for you folks also, you can use that with the PhotoLab program as well with DxO to use both Viveza, all the Nik plugins within that program. Great.
All right.
Okay, I think, yeah, let's go into color effects and see what kind of questions we have for that. Thanks.
Okay. All right, so let's see, where would we start with color effects? Let's do a simple one. Okay. So I'm going to go into color effects. There it is. I still, Lori, don't know these colors yet because you can minimize it and just have those, but I still have to look at this point. Still have to read it. Let's go to okay, so I'm in color effects now, and like if you break your leg, you could spend all of your time going through all of these filters in color effects because it is the most powerful, wonderful software. So what it is, it's a whole series of different presets that you can, if you don't know what direction to take a photo in, it's really nice to just go through and have a look at the different effects. And sometimes I end up taking a photo in a totally different direction. It's now and then you get a photo that you just don't know what to do with it. And I encourage you to try Nik for that, for color effects. And each one of these presets, if you click on this little part right here, this little stack, each one of those presets has sort of sub presets where things have already been adjusted over on the other side. So you can choose to look at these. If that's overwhelming for you, there's too many, you can look at a subcategory of just nature, what they suggest you use for nature. You can go through and click on the star and make a preset your favorite, and then you could just look at your favorites. Which, if it gets overwhelming, but when you're new to it, I really encourage you to go through all of those and see what they do and see what works for you. All right, so let's go to darken, lighten, center, which is one of my very favorites. So I shot this with my 180 millimeter lens with a filter on the end, a UV filter that had Vaseline around the edges, and that's what created this beautiful softness. But one of my favorite presets here is darken, lighten, center, and I use it a lot. I think darkening the edges of the frame, often with a flower, can really sort of hold the eye into the frame, and it will more direct the eye just where I want it. So I use it a lot. So the first thing you're going to look at over here in the menu is the shape. All right, this is a horizontal. I don't always use horizontal for horizontal pictures. It really depends on what's going on in the scene, the composition, but for this one, I'm going to go with the second option, okay? Now, next thing I need to do is place the center. I'm going to put the center in the center of the frame, okay? Now I can choose the center size, how big I want the center. I think that's pretty good where it is. All right, so let's brighten up the center a little bit. Don't go crazy. And again, you're moving the sliders slowly. And let's darken the edges a little bit to really make that center pop. And let's pull that up a little bit. So let's compare. All right, you see the difference? Okay, that is one of my favorites. The other thing that let's see, what else did I want to show you? I want to show you high key because it is another favorite. Look how beautiful this looks in high key. Okay, so this is a direction I might not have thought to take this flower into. And of course, there are 4 different variations of that. Look at that. I might keep this one. Or strong, or washed out. Okay, let's say that I went with this and I wanted to go back in and play with dark and light and center. I can add filter. You can stack these up, okay? You don't have to just do one, go back into Photoshop. You can add multiple filters together, all right? And remember that Nick is putting this on a new layer for you, so if the effect is too strong when you get back into Photoshop, you can pull the opacity down, okay? There's also a brush feature if you wanted to be fussy and apply the effect only where you wanted it. Let's say you didn't want high key in the center, you only wanted it around the edges. You could do that with your brush. Let's look at another photo. Let's cancel that. I'll show you one more with the dark and light and center. Let's get my color effects. All right, went to black and white. So even though this is a horizontal image, I'm going to leave this one in this orientation. I'm going to place my center. You know, it's pretty bright here. I want to even that out. So I'm going to place the center more up here. I think that took. There we go. All right, so let's brighten up that center a little. And let's darken the edges. I mean, this is lighter, and then darken those edges up so that this area really pops. So let's look at the before and after. Can you see that your eye is now directed in the center where it wasn't before? Okay, so this filter really allows you to draw attention just where you want it. And I will often do that as one of my last steps when I have finished processing a photo, take it in and have a look at light and dark and center to see if it helps to draw the eye, if it finishes off the image. Very simple one to use. Let's look at one of my other favorites. Okay, going to go to remove color cast. All right, so here's the image. So for me, this white flower has a bit of a color cast. I can see a little bit of blue, a little bit of greenish almost. And that can happen sometimes if you don't have your white balance set or you're shooting flowers in shade. Sometimes the light actually has a lot of blue in it. So I can come in and use remove color cast and really pull that blue out. Okay, just move the slider. All right, starting to get warmer now. Can you see how that blue went away? So I'm controlling the color and the strength. Okay, there's another way to do this in the same program. I want to show you that one as well. The other one that I love is white neutralizer. I use this a lot with white flowers. So with this one, there's a little eyedropper tool. So you click on that eyedropper. And then you're going to click on the color that you want changed. So this part right here is pretty gray. All right, so already it's gone warmer, and you can choose to neutralize only the whites or adjust the whole image. So let's play with that a little bit. And let's see what happens with this. All right, there are no blue tones now. Totally gone. All right, so that can really be handy for white flowers or areas of your image that have white. Maybe just the white center has a little issue. Very simple to fix white balance issues that way. I want to show you my, let's do this one. Nope, changed my mind. I want to show you this one first. All right, my all-time most favorite of any preset filter in Efex Pro is the Vignette filter. So let's grab Efex again. All right, make it larger. Okay, so the Vignette filter. So I was playing around in Nik one day, and I encourage you to do that to see what's available. And you know, I'm not a big fan of black vignettes, and I'm also not a fan of white vignettes. But I happened to notice that there was an eyedropper tool up here around the vignette. So I pulled the opacity down. I took that eyedropper tool and I sampled an area from the background of the image that I was using. Now, I'm usually sampling for this technique a mid color, not too dark, not too light. And there, look at all these greens, okay? My goal here is to simplify this image a bit. You know, I don't want to have to clone all of these out. I don't mind their shapes, but I just want to reduce their effect a little bit. And putting a light vignette over this will do that. Right, so let's grab a color. I think I got that. There we go. Sort of a mid-green. Let me see. Like that. You can see now that the color is showing green. Okay, and you're going to unplace the center. I'm going to put it on my flower because I don't want anything over that. Now let's start very slowly increasing the opacity. Can you see how this image is getting simpler by the second? How it tones down those areas? I'm actually going to move my center point a little bit lower. Okay, and you can do that. You're not stuck with the first one. So I think the opacity, I need more size, less opacity here. Okay, don't do this, because after I teach this, I see this on Facebook, and don't do that, okay? You really want to keep the opacity so that it's just adding, all right? I'm going to up the size on this, and I don't care if it's going over my flower, because I want to show you how I would apply this with a brush, which is what I'm doing mostly when I'm using this. All right, first let's look at before and after, okay? I'm going to pull the opacity down a little bit. Now I'm going to click brush. All right, I've got this new little panel that's open. It says brush the selection and hit apply. Okay, so the brush is already highlighted, and if you come over to my tools palette, you can see that Nik has already highlighted my brush tool. All I need to do is to choose the opacity. I do not do this at 100% because some areas are going to need more, and I go over them twice. Some areas will just need a single coat, as so to speak. So now I'm just going to brush this on just where I want it. I can avoid the flower. That's why I wasn't too concerned. This is a bright area. I'm going to go over it again. Okay, let's do this one. Let's up the opacity a little bit. All right, so just going to fill that in like that. All right, and now I'm going to come over and hit apply. Now, if there, I could also put it on completely and mask it off here, but I prefer to, I guess, be more proactive than reactive. I like to layer and sort of lay it on at different opacities. So I'm going to say apply. I can go into history. All right, there's your before and there's your after. Those elements were important. I just didn't want them taking over. All right, but let me show you how I use it most often on a close-up flower. Let's get rid of the history. Well, let's do this one. All right. So sometimes when you're shooting a large flower, you cannot eliminate the background, because if you do, you end up you would have to cut off petals that you feel are important to the composition. But if you know in the back of your mind that you can use Viveza and you can deal with that, you can use color effects and you can deal with that in post, then you don't worry about it. You don't stress about that composition. Am I trying to get all I can right in camera? Yes, I am. But this really, really helps. So let's get color effects open again. Okay. And it stayed large. All right, so it remembered that last color, and the last filter I opened came up. So I'm going to click on that eyedropper tool. Now, I'm going to use that vignette to paint over these dark areas. So I'm going to select a color near the edge. Okay, and we can place the center here. It's not going to matter because we're going to add this with a brush. So let's just start pulling this in. And again, don't do this, okay? Just because you can push a slider all the way to the right does not mean that you should. And I should have t-shirts made that say that. But if just look at these areas, see how they don't stand out as much now? They blend right in. Okay, if I wanted to, I could go in and add another filter as well. I could brighten this area up, or I could add a little bit of more definition. I could go to Detail Extractor and make that pop, but we're just going to show you how to add the vignette. So I'm going to click on Brush. Okay, this is already ready. That brush tool is highlighted. Over here, my brush tool is highlighted. I'm going to choose, it's too small, and the opacity, again, I like to build it up. So I'm just going to paint over the green areas and the black areas. Okay. Now what I will often do also is go down to about 15 to 20% and do the areas around that just to help blend that in. I'm just adding a little bit, okay? Or if I want to push this petal more into the background, I'll add a little bit on that. To this area, let's do this. All right, and so in seconds, you can really deal with those issues, all right? You might not, I shot this in my garden, but if I shot it inside, I don't have backgrounds that are just the right color, but I know I can add them in post. I want to do one more of those because it is the most popular thing, I guess, when I do workshops that people want to learn. And it really finishes off a flower photograph beautifully. All right, let's go back to color effects. Reduce the opacity. Remember to do that so you can see your subject and you can choose the color. I'm going to grab the eyedropper tool. So if I look at the color of the background here, I like this light color, but this is so dark that I think I might need to choose a little stronger color. So I'm going to go right here. You can see now there's the color that I'm going to use. This one I'm going to change the orientation. All right, and let's put the center. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to do this with a brush. Let's do that opacity. I'm going to go a little heavier with this. All right, like that. I'm going to click brush. This is something I always do with the brush. All right, the brush is highlighted. My brush is highlighted. Just start going over this. And with this one, I'm still at 19%. That's my problem. Let's go up to around 75, I think. Let's do that. I'm actually going to paint it on these brighter petals as well. Okay, I'm going to get those toned down into the background a little more in that area. And here's a bright spot. You see how that will just tone that right down? Same with this area. I'm going to paint it on this petal as well, and this section. All right, then you let go of the mouse and go back over any areas that need a second coat, so to speak. The areas that were very dark. Okay, and you see now that doing that keeps your attention here. Those were strong areas of contrast. Everything here is light and pink and beautiful, and then there were these dark areas. So you want to eliminate contrast. You want to keep the eye on your subject. This is a really, really simple way to do that. Questions for me on color effects or on flower photography or on Viveza or anything?
Oh my
Maine?
gosh, there's a lot of questions. Let's see here. So first of all, Kathleen, do you ever save your presets? Let's say you combine several filters together and create a
I
preset with these
I
color
I have
effects?
done that for portraits when I do a photo shoot of a family session, for example, or when I shoot my granddaughters. I know that their mother will be framing them together, and I want anything that I do to match. And so yes, I have recipes for people, but I don't with flowers because for me it's just too individual.
Do you work with the mouse and screen, or do you use a
I
tablet?
I I have a tablet in a box. And I know I need to learn how to use it, but I took it out once, got really frustrated, and I'm pretty darn good with a mouse. So, yeah. Do I have one? Yes. Do I use it? No.
Okay, let's see here. And let's talk about Viveza and color effects together.
Okay.
Do you usually start out with Viveza and then go to color effects? What's your
Yes.
workflow between the
Yes.
two?
That's a great question. Yeah, I would start off with Viveza because it's selective. Okay, so I would want to make any selective changes first, say in this, before I would add a vignette. The vignette or the dark and light in the center, I see those as a finishing off technique, not anything that I would do right in the beginning. So I start in Viveza.
And let's talk about showing before and after. There are a couple people that wanted to see how you compare the befores and afters. Would you be able to pull up an image in this at the top of the screen where it has a compare button?
Oh, good idea. Sure. Let's open this one. All right. So this is one that I processed and added a texture, and I feel like the flower, it really wasn't this yellow, and I feel like I went a little bit overboard. So I went into color effects to try and fix my error. Okay. Oh, we don't really want to vignette that. We want to neutralize that white. All right, so let's just click going to neutralize the white. Okay, so if you want to compare, you can either click the compare button and hold it down to see, or you could do a split screen, okay, where you can see the effect that way. Or this third option would be to see the two images together as a whole, okay? Does that help?
Yes, that's great. Okay, all right, let's go to this. Do you ever use vignette blur?
No, I like to do my blur in camera, so that is one that I have never used.
Okay.
I shoot with Lensbabies, and I love the distortional blur, so I don't add blur in post processing.
Okay. What about focus stacking?
I'm sort of like the opposite of focus stacking. I like to say that I like to dance on the edge of seeing how little I can get away with having in focus and still tell the story that I want to tell. So I love blur. If there's I love blur anonymous. I could be president because I really love it. And so focus stacking just gives you so much depth of field that it's just totally not my style. Nothing wrong with it. And I see a lot of people do beautiful work with it, but it's just not for me.
There's a question about cropping.
Okay.
Let's talk about cropping. Do you crop?
No, I don't. I don't crop my images. What you see is what I saw through my viewfinder. If I'm shooting a landscape and I have to straighten a horizon, I will crop, just the edges that because I had to straighten the horizon. I do not crop my flower photos. I compose at the time, looking through my viewfinder. Doing that makes you slow down, and slowing down, I think, makes you a better photographer. You pay more attention. I never say, well, I'll just, I'll compose that in Photoshop. I'll crop that out. I don't. I mean, I'll clone in Photoshop to remove something, but I don't throw pixels away to do that.
Okay. And do you always use a tripod?
I never use, not for flowers. I don't use a tripod. I use it for landscapes when I'm going to have a slow shutter and I need deep depth of field. When I'm shooting flowers, most of the time I'm shooting at a large aperture, lets plenty of light in. And right now, still at this advanced age, I'm very steady. When that stops and I start having issues with sharpness and detail, then I'll be on a tripod. But right now I use my tripod to hold my diffuser or my reflector or a background. So I still bring the tripod, but I don't use it. I don't put a head on it when I bring it to a garden. It's just extra
Okay.
weight.
Yeah, interesting. Do you ever
Yeah.
use those little clips to like keep the flowers from moving around?
Um, Not in a public garden. I'll do that at home. I will also use them. I'll take a cut flower and use my clamp, and then I could place a textured background print behind it, or I can move it to an area of the yard that has better light, a better background, gives me lots of control.
Okay. Here's more of an artistic type question.
Okay.
Nicole is asking, many of your flowers are blurry. When is it better to have them clear or not?
That's personal taste. You know, I personally like to have at least a small area in focus. Now and then I will go totally soft, but most of the time I want selective focus, not soft focus, selective focus where I have a small area in focus surrounded by blur. That's my favorite way to shoot. But if the flower, is all about texture, then I'm going to use a smaller aperture to bring that texture out. So it really depends on the subject. I can shoot at f/22. I just choose not to. Most of the time, I'm more f/5.6 and under, between 2.8 to 5.6. I've been shooting dahlias in my garden. Dahlias have a lot of depth and they have petals coming toward you. All right. So if you don't stop down to a small aperture with something like that, you're going to get what I call blob blur. The parts coming toward you will be blobs. So I stop down when necessary for the subject, or because, or to tell the story that I want to tell.
Okay. And what about using a flash? Do you ever use a flash?
Never. Nope. Never.
Okay.
Natural light. I control light with the diffuser and a reflector. I have a small reflector that's silver on one side, gold on the other. You could also use, when I've been desperate, I've used a piece of white paper to bounce light. If you've got a white t-shirt on and you're close to your subject, you can bounce a little bit of light. A little piece of tin foil in your camera bag works great as a reflector. You don't have to buy one.
Okay. And Deborah's asking, what does Kathleen do when there just isn't a good background in the field?
That's great. I sell textures on my website. Some of you might know this, and I will print them out on matte paper, and I then glue them onto foam core. People always ask what size I have. Most of them are 8x12. That's plenty big for most flowers. And I'll put with the foam core, one texture on one side, one on the other, matte paper so that you have no glare. And with my clamp, I'll place that behind my subject. Now, I don't really do this much in a public garden because you can't get your tripod legs in the garden beds. If it's a situation where I can, or I will just hold it if I have to. But here at the house, I definitely can put my tripod right in the garden. And shooting inside, I will do the same thing. I've got some of my textures printed in 11x17, which is as large as my printer prints. That's why it's that size. And I'll just place them against a piece of foam core and set my subject up in front, either in a vase or attached to my clamp, my Wimberley clamp. And use those as a background. So most, and there are times, let's just face it, that you look at the subject and the subject might be beautiful, but the background is horrible and there's nothing you can do about it. Then you just enjoy that subject for its beauty and you walk away.
Okay, here's a question for you from Michael. Do you ever use artificial flowers when fresh aren't available?
Oh, Michael, no.
I had to throw that in there.
No, Michael, they're always available. There are dandelions growing on your lawn. If you've never shot clover before, really have a close look at clover. Grocery stores have flowers now. Home Depot has amazing plants. That you could take a potted plant, shoot the heck out of it for a week, and then put it in your garden. No, I do not ever shoot artificial flowers. God, my grandmother would be rolling over in a grave. I got my love for flowers from my grandmother, and she hated artificial flowers. I couldn't do it, Michael. Just couldn't do it.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, Kathleen, I just absolutely love her images. They're so, I don't know, soulful. They're and artistic and beautiful. And, Kathleen, I've known you for, 10 years or so, back in the days of Nik software. So she's been using Nik collection for a long time, and you can see how beautiful her post-production is. I want to thank Kathleen for a wonderful presentation and for showing us her artistic and gorgeous images.
Thank you, Lori. And if anyone comes up with a question afterwards, you can get to me from my website, KathleenClemons.com. Just send me a note.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you have a great day. Please join us again for another webinar. And Kathleen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.